I'm just reading from Personality and Evolution, Stan Gooch's second book. And it's chapter 9, which is called True and False Alternative Societies. And it's a paragraph that sort of relates to society today and a lot of what's going on and what we face, the problems we're facing at the moment. Again, it's just an interesting take on the subject of identity. So this is the beginning of the chapter. This chapter begins with some unflattering remarks about liberated youth. This was written in I think it's 73. 73. This chapter begins with some unflattering remarks about liberated youth. These are followed by some equally unflattering comments on the establishment, which I hope will both redress the balance and clear me of any charges of bias. Some few years ago, a friend described to me the behaviour of a group of young people he had observed in the Portobello Road in London. Portobello Road was a sort of hippie stronghold back in the 1960s. They were extravagantly dressed, both men and women, in long flowing clothes and headgear of attractive colours. By disposition extremely gentle, they moved slowly, gracefully and peaceably among the stalls, but then disaster. The words which now follow are not mine, but those of my friend. One of the girls became separated from the herd. She gazed about her in helpless agitation, her gentle eyes filled with anxiety. In a street not noted for its conventional dress, she nevertheless stood out. Her cover had vanished. She was both alone and exposed. At this point, my friend said, he expected her to throw up her head and give forth a long, helpless moo. This somewhat unfriendly account nevertheless brings out many of the features of the hippie, revolutionist, dropout and incidentally socialist, trade unionist spectrum. The belongingness and the need to belong, the fear of both isolation and the individual response, the wish never to be so far ahead or so far behind that real separation is a possibility. There are other items here too, a certain herbivorous quality, for example, but the instance is too narrow a plank on which to build such a detailed structure of comment. We shall, though, be considering other evidence in due course. For the moment, let me merely assuage those who would urgently point out some of the enormous differences between some of the subgroups I have mentioned, hippies and trade unionists, for example. I do not seek to deny the many differences, but these are for me always overridden by the consistencies and similarities which underlie all forms of what all these behaviours are, System B and self-activities. So, in this book, Stan is formulating his idea of the cerebrum dominant person, which is what he called System A or ego driven, and the System B personality, which is self-driven. The self as in the... So he divided personality into two types, ego and self. And these were cerebrum-led or cerebellum-led, and the cerebellum-led personality is what he terms System B, and the cerebrum-led personality is System A. So this would eventually develop into System A being Cro-Magnon dominant, and System B is Neanderthal dominant. So back to the book. Now to the promised slur on the establishment. Are not the wearing of a wig and robes by judges and of uniforms by the military among the most utterly mindless and ludicrous practices of our time? It is almost past belief that grown men, not unintelligent men in many cases, can go through the mummery of putting on a piece of false hair when engaged in the very serious business indeed of attempting to judge the actions and determine the fate of a fellow human being. At a moment when this man should be closest to the humanity of the man or woman on trial, he, the judge, renounces that humanity, enthrones himself upon a raised dais to show that he is more important than the accused, clothes himself in fancy dress that you may not recognise him as a fellow human being, and possibly detect that what he sits upon is an arse. Were rebel dissidents really interested in destroying the establishment? They are not, despite appearances, as I shall hope to show. They would all forthwith begin wearing judges' robes and wigs and no other form of clothing until such time as the practice was abandoned by the courts. The dissidents might do this for a while if it were declared a fashion, as they have done with military uniform, but first they would stylise it in some way, transform it into gear, which would already destroy the whole point. Nor would they continue to wear it once it ceased to be the latest craze, even if their objective had not yet been achieved. We shall be coming to the central role of fashion and vagary in the group and self-society in much more detail later in this chapter. Similarly, for his part, the judge could destroy much of the psychological force of a dissident's protest if he would sit in judgment on him wearing a striped caftan, dragging on a mild joint and holding a flower in one hand. There is no valid reason why he should not do this, for how is or could the operation and logic of justice be in any way affected by what people happen to be wearing? Yet the judge will not do this, for he, like the dissident, cannot expose the posturing of the other side without first abandoning his own postures. Neither of the two can or will step outside his role and his group identity. Were either side willing, able to abandon its postures, victory for it would be assured. But it would achieve its aims by the sacrifice of its own existence. Here is the crux of the matter. For their existence, not their aims, is really what counts with both traditional and revolutionary. What of the soldier? Another grown man playing at dressing up, but not playing, no, indeed. As serious as any small boy involved in cops and robbers, he will not only probably strike you should you address him as the boy he is, he may even kill you. Though not, on the other hand, if he is an officer, for this man is not actually unintelligent. The situation is rather that he must and does continually rationalise his emotional 11-year-old personality to himself. Therefore he may calmly, not truly calm however, merely very controlled, order your arrest, imprisonment, fair trial and execution. Turning at this point to general theory, we may understand further some of the essential differences between System B and System A communities in the central proposal that all the former are governed by fashion and all the latter by tradition. With the term fashion, I mean to suggest that this type of society, the System B self-society, is forever appearing in new forms, though underneath basically unchanging, while the System A, or ego society, though it changes only very, very gradually, and although its actions are always based almost entirely on precedent, does nevertheless, in its own slow way, move on and evolve. The System B society, we can say, brings old wine in new bottles, while the System A society brings new wine in old bottles. We see in this summarization once again the reversal of polar opposites that we must now not merely expect but demand in any description of the qualities of self and ego. Personality and Evolution is probably the best book that Stan wrote on an examination of human personality and developing his hybrid origin theory. it's very in depth, and it covers some aspects of personality that today have been completely forgotten or are excluded from general understanding because they are inconvenient or uncomfortable to have to face up to. So it's well worth a read.